All right, welcome to Think or Be Eaten. Our guest is Ray Nelson, an author whose major work has been mainly in the science fiction genre. He's written at least 10 books, the best known of which, arguably, are The Ganymede Takeover and Blake's Progress. He's no stranger to the short story, and perhaps his most popular work in that medium is 8 o'clock in the morning, on which the film They Live is based. Ray is also a cartoonist of note and has screenwriting credentials as well. He drew a comic book version of 8 o'clock titled Nada for the comic book Alien Encounters. And of course, he was involved in writing the screenplay for They Live under the pen name Frank Armitage. And I believe Al Carpenter was involved in that, and his girlfriend, if I got it right. But Ray was born in Schenectady, now currently lives in California. Back in the late 50s, he married in France, where he also met the Beats, and I'd like to ask him about that. And he also attended University of Chicago, and that's kind of interesting, too. So, Ray, thanks very much for taking the time to be with us.
I'm delighted that somebody still remembers me.
Well, there's a couple of general questions I've been dying to ask a science fiction writer.
Okay.
But I would also ask you this. Now, They Live just popped up on American movie classics.
Right.
And it'll do that. It'll go around. And when that happens, do you get any kind of upswell in activity as far as people contacting you?
No.
Okay. Well,
it's hard to know that I was associated with it.
You know,
my name appears on the leader as the author of the story, and I get the whole screen to myself for about half a second. And that's the only time my actual name appears on the movie.
It's my way. I'm not saying it's good, bad, or sideways, but it's my way when I see something that really impacts me. If it's in the film medium, I want to see if there is a literary work upon which that it's based, because I want to get to whoever wrote this thing to begin with. And that's what happened with my contacting you. I thought that They Live was a prescient movie to a certain extent with what Carpenter added back in '88. But for you to have written a short story upon which that film is based in '63 or so, or even before '63, I would take it.
Yeah, a little before '63. It sold very quickly, first time out.
Well, and that's why I said, boy, I want to know who this is. So, great for the movie, but I'd like to get to the source, and hence that's why we're talking. But let me ask you, did you write that prior to '63 or during that year?
I think it was late '62.
All right. Before we get any more specifics, into any more specifics with 8 o'clock in the morning, I've been wanting to ask, first of all, do you make any kind of difference between science fiction and futurism?
Well, futurism is a art movement, mainly in Italy, drawing things that looked mechanical.
All right, I would take it that the way that's used nowadays, at least in some places, futurism with regard to movies, is perhaps a movie that isn't so technologically based, I guess you could say, on weaponry or even perhaps aliens, but in the way a society might be at a certain point. How do you go with that?
Well, that's what's called hard science fiction.
Okay.
But this is the very first time I've heard the word futurism associated with any particular kind of science fiction.
Yeah, I can't say how that came about. It just seemed to be something that a number of us accepted, other guests and such. And I would think that would be the distinction, but obviously that's not something that is prevalent, to say the least. But another thing, I've always said that there really is no such thing as science fiction. It's not fiction. How do you feel about that?
Well, I think it certainly is fiction. There's degrees. I guess there's what you call a scale of bullshit.
Okay.
And a totally realistic story is a small quantity of bullshit. And a hard science fiction story is a lot of bullshit. And a total fantasy is 100% bullshit.
Okay. I guess let me refine that question if I could, if I can get out of this. I had done a graduate project back in 2001, from 2000 to 2001. And it was based on what some science fiction writers wrote about at the midpoint of the 20th century, and writing about the 21st, what they foresaw. Now, I know you had a relationship with Philip K. Dick. And
we wrote a book together.
Right, and that was the Ganymede Takeover, correct?
That's it, yeah.
Now, let's just say, one of the books I read at that time for this project was Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep? And there were a certain amount of, I guess you could say, technological devices that if he wrote about it, say around the mid-50s, they certainly have come true. That's why I'm saying there's a certain element, I think, in science fiction that is not fiction. I'll try one more time.
Oh, that's true. There's a certain amount of guessing about the future. But it's a fairly informed kind of guessing because most of the science fiction writers have a background in science of one sort or another.
Yeah, it would seem so. Even like in Bradbury's 451, talking about the wall size TV, if you will. Well, we had our Sony Trinitrons wall size, and we have them today. It seems that some of the hardware that they've written about, I would assume they might have had some kind of, I don't know, inside information, or at least some contacts that might have been able to apprise them of what was in R&D at the time.
True. Well, I've got a really good prediction that did come true. I predicted the magnetic levitation train in the late 40s.
All right, now...
And now they got them zooming around in Japan.
Well, what led you to that? Was that something that you just were working around in your mind as like a mental activity, and then kind of built around it and said, this is no way, shape, or form something that can't happen?
Well, actually, it was a result of a experiment that I did in the high school physics lab. I built a gadget, a line of magnets that would fire one at a time in series, and would shoot a little ball of iron like a gun. And that gave me the idea that this little ball of iron could get big and be a train. And I was pumping up a story called Turn Off the Sky, putting into it things that didn't exist, but which I suspected might exist. But at the time that Turn Off the Sky came out, I got letters from physicists saying that the magnetic levitation train was impossible. And too bad that I never got back to them when the Japs had one going.
All right. Well, now, you got your desire to delve into science fiction, as it says in your biography on your website, raynelson.com.
Mm-hmm.
You were impacted heavily by the World's Fair, was it?
Oh, yes. That's the 1939 World's Fair in New York City.
Yeah.
They had a robot there. It was about twice as tall as a real person, and it had a little robot dog accompanying it. And its big trick was that it blew absolutely perfectly round smoke rings when it was smoking a cigarette. And my brother and I stood at the foot of this giant robot and saw these smoke rings wafting out. And I don't think either my brother or I ever quite recovered from that.
That it stuck with you that long and had that much of an impact to lead you into your profession. Yeah, I would have to say so. And by the way, let me ask you just real quickly, and we'll go back to it later. When you entered University of Chicago, did you have a major in mind? Were you going to get involved in any type of science?
It was a preparatory course for becoming a minister.
Uh-huh.
In the Unitarian denomination.
You know, did I read something recently that's that School of Divinity, if that's what you would refer to it as. Was that renamed or split off at all from the University of Chicago?
It was a part of the University of Chicago.
Right. All right. I don't know. I'm trying to...
It was called Meadville.
Okay.
Meadville Seminary.
All right. Just something recently. came to mind, and I just took note of the fact that it was once, I guess, involved in the University of Chicago. But you were going to go there you're going to prepare for the priesthood or something?
Well, it's not exactly a priesthood. My father had the idea that I was a good prospect to be a Unitarian minister. But there was one little detail that went wrong, and that is I couldn't quite accept the idea of God. So it didn't work out.
Yeah, that could probably put a...
That was a sticking point for some reason.
And by the way, your upbringing was in Schenectady, New York?
Part of it was. My parents moved a lot. My father was an electronics engineer, and he went where they needed him.
Did you get an opportunity, by the way, to go to high school in Schenectady?
I went to high school in Cadillac, Michigan.
Okay. No, I just took note of that because I'm a Jersey boy originally, and I was exiled to the Hudson Valley every summer to my grandparents, and we got our TV out of Schenectady and Albany and Troy. And
oh, you did, huh?
Yeah, and I'll never forget. Every 5 o'clock, Monday through Friday, I prop myself in front of Grandma and Grandpa's TV and watch Freddie Freihofer's show.
Well, you're talking to the first kid who ever watched cartoons on television. My father was working on the television project before there was any television, and they had a bunker at a place called Arnie's Mount, where they sent television signals from one end of the bunker to the other. And sitting on a sort of wooden shelf on the receiving end, there was a little tiny kid looking at a little tiny image, and that was me.
Well, did your interest in science and such, was that something that also had to do with your exposure to your dad's work?
Slightly, but my dad didn't have a scientific career in mind for me. He thought I had a great future in theology. He was pretty religious in his way too, and he had some bitter experiences as an electronics engineer, so that he didn't want his son to fall into the same traps.
Well, if we could take a look at the times during which you wrote 8 o'clock in the morning, I take it, had you just come back from France?
Right. Well, not just. I wrote some other things before 8 o'clock in the morning, most notably the story I just mentioned, Turn Off the Sky. That was my first professional science fiction publication. That came out in 1961, I believe.
All right, now 8 o'clock in the morning, to me, I don't know now, I may be making more of this, but you're going to tell me. Reading that back in the 60s, it would have been, oh, that's a nice science fiction story, and I'd be off and running. Mm-hmm. Looking at it now, something's hit me, and to me, there is a conspiracy. The world runs by conspiracy. What I was interested in finding from you, whether or not that was a commentary about what you were seeing happening in, shall we say, a more advancing technological environment?
Well, you hit it right on the nose. That was the main idea of several different ideas that was in my mind.
All right, well, I'll tell you, if there are any others there, would you share them with us?
Okay, the second layer down was an idea of what the ideal protagonist in a story should be. And that's the 8 o'clock in the morning story is written on the theory that the protagonist in a story should have as few characters as possible. He should be a blank, and that's the reason why it's called George Nada.
Okay.
And my idea was that if the character had no traits, then anyone who was reading the story could project themselves into the character. There wouldn't be any segregation in the readership. So that was the second layer. And then the third layer was that I'd been hypnotized and realized that to a certain extent everybody seemed to be hypnotized by commercials and advertising. And it's that story has so many. It's sort of like a triple-decker sandwich.
Mm-hmm.
All sorts of ideas pour into a rather teeny tiny little story.
Oh, I think that's why it's lived on and is as popular as it is. It's interesting too that you said that Nana obviously is nothing, but the way you describe the character as being kind of a vacuum of traits to a sort, so that anyone can identify. He's also kind of like an everyman as well.
Well, if he's an any man, then he can be an everyman. He has that option.
All right. Now, just speaking to television, you just shared with us that you got a sneak peek, more or less, at television. You certainly grew up with television, whereas I kind of came in a little bit later. Didn't see the real early years, but enough that I remember TV when it didn't go 24/7 with test patterns and tones and the national anthem.
Memory lane.
Well, I tell you what, I guess it's because melancholy grows stronger as you get older, or at least the past seems fonder. But I'll say that for the quality, without the 24/7 content, I would rather have TV the way it used to be. And there's a time when I think it's good that it isn't accessible. And that's, I guess, where I'm going with this story as well. And that is, did you see television that, although it seemed like a boon of sorts, a convenience of sorts, an entertainer of sorts, that you saw that there was something much more malevolent, perhaps that would even supersede the other capabilities?
Well, I did see it as malevolent, and my father, who actually worked on the development of television, saw it as so malevolent that he wouldn't allow a television set in the house. So what I was really brought up on was radio theater, and that's what I look back to with fond memories.
The radio.
Radio theater.
Like
the H.G. Wells show that scared the nation. Made everyone think that men from Mars were actually invading.
All right, well, now that you mention that, let me ask you your opinion. Do you believe that that was a psychological op that was run by the populace?
I've never thought about that. I can't give you an answer because it's something I've never considered.
All right. With the television, was there something also in its functioning? Of course, we talk about flicker rates and such. Is there something true to that as far as being something that would throw you into, the beta state?
Well, actually, there have been some scientific experiments that show that the flicker does have, especially on people who have a tendency towards epilepsy, it does throw them into a trance.
And it's more or less, I guess, assumed nowadays that it makes for a very pliant audience, one that is not necessarily encouraged to critically analyze anything. You're basically, you become a receiver as well.
Exactly.
By the way, I just wanted to ask you something. Do you remember the episode, and this happened near where I lived, that began, I guess, early on with Armstrong and the Armstrong Tower in the lower Hudson Valley?
I vaguely remember something about that.
Yeah, I guess as the story goes, Armstrong got somehow, so the story says, I guess screwed is the best word, by Sarnoff from NBC. And I think he later committed suicide. But there is a tower that I spent most of my life kind of having it over my shoulder, which is the Armstrong Tower, just across the state line in New York. And, of course, he's obviously tied in. That bears his name. But it was not necessarily a very happy story between himself and Sarnoff as it goes. But I didn't know if you had any other information regarding that, because obviously of your dad's involvement. But that might have been just a localized situation too, and probably better known about New York. Now with TV as well, technically there could be a problem as far as its impact on human beings. But what about content? At that time, it seemed pretty innocuous. And perhaps there was some very good drama that took place. There were a lot of teleplays at the time, like Enemy of the State. Enemy of the
what
People.
wasn't so innocuous was various commercials that gave supernatural attributes to various products. That looked innocuous, but I think that it wasn't innocuous, and that it was highly effective in selling products, but it was very deleterious in training people to accept hypnotic suggestions from their television set.
So you think the power of television combined with that of advertisers and manipulators, if you will, carried the real threat?
Exactly.
As we look at the way TV is today and the networks and such, what's your take, and this is, I guess, where it really bugs me, what's your take on the way that news is being purveyed?
In this country, it doesn't deserve the name of news anymore. If you want to know what's happening in the world, you have to know at least one foreign language and subscribe to at least one non-English speaking publication.
Because we're not getting the truth about ourselves inside this nation.
That's it. You're getting a constant stream of propaganda in favor of big corporations. And even now, we're in the very midst of a big corporation, British Petroleum, that has committed, what would you call it, committed murder. 11 people died on that thing, and all they're talking about is how everything's going to be nicey-nicey in just a little while, and it's not. But a huge number of people are buying this easily refuted claim.
Mm-hmm. Well, we here in Florida on the West Coast, the Gulf Coast, are kind of hushed and waiting to see what's going to happen.
Well, what's happening is happening. There's a certain stretch of sand in Florida, in Pensacola.
That's right. And
the sand in that beach was the whitest sand in the world.
That's true.
But it's not anymore.
Yeah, it's called the Redneck Riviera, and they are the white beaches of this state. No doubt about it.
Yeah, well, they're oil-colored now.
Yes. Do you have
People go along, they're picking up little blobs, little tar balls. But the oil that's really going to ruin that beach forever, they don't see it because it's just a few inches down in the sand. But that sand will never be white again. It will never be white again.
Now that we're on that subject, there are a lot of theories and a lot of information being disseminated about what's happening there. I doubt that any of us are getting the true story, only because I'm afraid that the real truth is something that they don't want to share with anyone, and that is that oil spill will only end when it's finally run out to a point that it's over with, that they really can't do anything. Maybe a relief well would help, but as far as anything else going, I think they always knew that whatever measures they were taking, like Top Hat, was not the answer, but just buying time. Your thoughts on that, Ray?
I think you nailed it. You got it.
Well, it's going to end when it wants to end, and that's about it. So who knows what size of a catastrophe this is going to be as we look past the next couple of months. And, of course, now they're throwing in the factor about a tropical storm or a hurricane, which is a crapshoot as to whether it's going to actually help or even exacerbate the situation.
Well, I think that the big lie in this case is that British Petroleum is trying to plug up the oil. What British Petroleum is trying to do is continue to harvest that oil. They're not really interested in stopping the flow.
Right.
They're interested in directing the flow through their normal refining procedures.
That's right.
And those two ends, it would be possible.
Mm-hmm.
Especially it was possible when the break first came to send a device which is called a balloon gasket, to stuff a balloon gasket into the pipe and inflate it, and that would be a totally effective plug. It would plug it. But if they plugged it, then they couldn't harvest it. And so they did all kinds of tap dancing with different kinds of equipment, always having in mind that they wanted a solution that consisted of them continuing to harvest that oil.
Yep. Going back to the short story.
Right.
And where we were talking about whether or not there was some symbolism to your protagonist's name, Nada.
Yeah.
Why did you choose, of all the things you could have chosen to name the aliens, why Fascinators?
Well, because the process of hypnosis is a process of fascinating people.
That's right.
That is, fastening the consciousness on the commands of the hypnotizer.
Now,
I didn't want to just say hypnotizer.
Right.
So I picked a synonym for hypnotizer and used that instead.
I think I might know the answer to this question, but was there any kind of significance, which is not stated in the story, and therefore it may not matter, I understand, but with opening up with this gentleman as part of a show where we've seen that, where hypnotists obviously cast their spell over the subjects, was this something that was strictly an entertainment thing, or was it something that was at intervals? I mean, did it do anything to reinforce the spell, so to speak, by the Fascinators?
Well, I opened up with a stage show because the public is familiar with stage shows of hypnotism, and it would seem much more plausible to them if I began with something that was familiar.
In this one paragraph I want to ask you about, it said, at intervals along the street, George saw the posters hanging with photographs of the Fascinators' multiple eyes and various commands printed under them, such as work 8 hours, play 8 hours, sleep 8 hours, marry and reproduce, etc. In the short story, then, these commands were not something that was underlying another message as it was in They Live. This was just strictly giving it to you straight.
Well, I think a lot of the messages in They Live and the messages in 8 o'clock in the morning are word for word the same.
They are, but they were overlaid in the movie, were they not, with supposedly just a commercial slogan? And when...
Well, that was just a slight elaboration on
Right.
the theme. I actually had something like that in mind from the very beginning. It's just in the short story I had to trim it down to just the bare essentials that would fit into that particular length. But most of the ideas that appeared, more of the story appeared when I did it as a comic book, and still more of the idea appeared when I did it as a movie. But that was a matter of space limitations. The entire idea was in my head when I wrote the short story version, but I didn't try to wedge it all into that short format.
But it just seems so right, because we spend a lot of our time, and this is what I was saying, you get a lot of crooked information, basically lies or manipulations, whether it's for selling a product or a mindset in a nation. But, so I don't know if you remember the days of Soupy Sales, but they would have a saying, and he would say, what do we mean by that? And that's exactly what I feel I do and many others, and that is you get hit with this information, and it's like, okay, on the surface, I understand what you're saying, but what's underneath it? And that's why that use of the technique in the movie hit the nail right on the head.
Right.
So, I mean, and it's, no, nothing need more be said about that. When you wrote this as well, it seemed to me that, as I said, the science fiction that I had used as a model for the project, I have to say, to a work, they did not really portend anything positive. but more of an ominous future. I happen to believe that is the case, but can you explain to me what you, for instance, and your colleagues, why that was that particular outcome?
Well, in the story, as you recall, it ends with the protagonist dies of a hypnotic suggestion, but he succeeds in waking up the slumbering populace. And that means that there's going to be a struggle, and I would imagine that the non-hypnotized people will come out on top.
Well, because of technology, you spoke to a certain degree with television, mm-hmm. but also with what's coming up with what seems to be, and I'm going to ask your opinion. I look at the electronics that are out there. I look at the gadgets. It's all for your convenience. Mm-hmm. But there seems to be, especially with regard to communication, that this convenience is going to be easily turned around as a method of control. What are your thoughts about that?
Well, I think that that could be the way it goes, and that's the way it's being used by radio broadcasters, especially on the Republican side of the ticket. They are using it to hypnotize people into being afraid of their own government.
That's interesting. Ray, I've often thought of our government in a duality, and I would liken it to an abusive parent, where on one hand it seems to be an adversary beating up the child, and then mm-hmm. taking on an advocacy and being nice to the child. So you get the object, whether it's a child or a population, kind of just, I don't know, just willing to throw their hands up in the air and say, we'll do whatever you want us to do.
Well, the recent development is that what I would call the fascinators have coagulated on one side of the political spectrum. It used to be there was such a thing as an honest, intelligent conservative. And now you have a conservative, he'll say no if you say yes, no matter what the yes refers to.
Well, do you think that what we have with this two-party system is nothing more than a dog and pony show to keep people thinking they have a process, while the corporations, which I think you referred to before, mm-hmm. more or less get what they want done? And most of them are also internationalists, where this is going to be tied into one big happy family. What do you think about that?
Well, you're talking about a very real and present danger. That's what I think about that.
And going back to the electronics too, what I was thinking of is there was a time, I think we all come from a generation, from a cohort that has some kind of value to privacy.
Right.
What I see now happening, and the youngsters especially being indoctrinated early on with their first cell phone, they are now throwing their privacy away by themselves. They're doing it to themselves, whether it's where they lay everything out on Twitter or Facebook, or they're going ahead and they're surveilling other people with their cameras in their cell phones. And I remember, you might remember this line from former Supreme Court Justice Louis Brandeis, who said the most precious right that an American has is the right to be left alone. And it seems that these recent and generations to come are more or less actually forfeiting it themselves as if it's some kind of great thing.
Well, I think you've nailed it again.
How come I'm not writing science fiction?
Well, there's nothing to prevent you from doing it except that the market is not nearly as large as it used to be.
Why would that be?
Well, I don't really know. I still think it is the most challenging, most interesting form of literature that ever has appeared on this planet. But it might be that at least the technological part of science fiction has so much come true that people don't think of it as fiction anymore. They can't really focus their minds on a world that didn't have cell phones in it and didn't have electronic surveillance cameras in every drugstore and all that vast technological stuff they take for granted.
Yes.
Whereas it was part of a menacing possibility in the 30s and 40s.
Before we go any further, it's the bottom of the hour. Folks,
okay.
We're talking with Ray Nelson. Ray, you have the website, raynelson.com. That link to your site will be up with this audio. Can you tell folks more or less what they can find there? And also, if they would like to purchase either a book of short stories or your fiction works, how that can be done?
Well, on my website, there's a list of my novels and most of my a lot of my short stories. And Amazon.com is the best place to go, because on Amazon you can get second-hand books as well as first-hand books. And some of my titles are out of print. And raynelson.com is my website designation. So if you click onto raynelson.com, you'll see along one side of it a list of things that you can link to. And that will take you to, among other things, my tricks of the trade, things that would be useful for any writer to know. And also there's a link to companies that are making helicopter beanies. And helicopter beanie is something that I invented in 1947. And I don't get any money out of it, but I get a kick out of it when people buy those helicopter beanies. But the helicopter beanie was originally supposed to be worn by science fiction fans to be a sign of being a science fiction fan. And now it's spread out, so it's also the approved or approved headgear for computer hacks, people like that.
We my former co-host who actually birthed this show, it'll be 8 years in 2 weeks. He and I had worked together with a supervisor who was a real gadget guy, but a real pain in the ass. So we didn't like him, but he was real testy, and so what we did is we just bought a helicopter beanie and we mailed it to him anonymously. So I think.
Well, if it had been me, I would have sent you a thank you note.
Somehow I think he didn't take it that way. We never heard about it, and that's it. We're just happy in a sense after a while that, somehow, some way it didn't get traced back to us. But anyway.
Well, there's one company called Interstellar Propeller. And the Interstellar Propeller Company, whenever they bring out a new model of helicopter beanie, they send me a free copy of it. And that is my total royalty.
Okay. All right, back to the story if I can. The statement about guns, that guns don't kill people, people do. That technology is neither good nor bad except how it's used. You now have a website. You're involved in the Internet. Your take on the Internet?
Well, I use it a lot to communicate with people with short messages. And some people send me pictures and things. Particularly, I like to get pictures of Paris because I am very nostalgic about Paris. But I'm not into it very deeply. I check my email every morning, and that's about it. I haven't added anything to my website for years.
Well, I'll give you a real quick example. There has been a wildfire rumor that has gained so much ground, and it has to do with Tampa Bay being evacuated because of the spill. Now, I live in the Tampa Bay area, and this is not even a situation yet. This started back before May 21st. May 21st is when I became aware of it. And so just the other day on local CBS TV, the talking head who was doing the news stated that Tampa Bay's city council or whatever, Chamber of Commerce, had to debunk the fact that there is no evacuation down here. And I knew that what had happened was that rumor had been birthed on the internet and spread like wildfire on the internet, and yet it contains no truth whatsoever. So when I say about the internet and knowing how you felt about TV, do we not see an element of that also in the internet where it can be used for good or for bad, and certainly for some kind of propaganda?
Well, that certainly is true, but I'm not influenced much by stuff that I see on people's websites. Because I know that in many times things appear about me that I know for sure are not true. Nothing appears about me very recently. That's why I was so delighted to hear from you. But back when people knew that I existed, they made up stories about me that had no foundation in fact whatsoever, but they spread just the same. I didn't like that too well, and that probably is one reason why I'm not more into the internet than I am.
Well, funny you should say that, because I wanted to address this, because I would say that, listen, if there were a problem down here, I would confirm it. I'd have no problem with that. I'm not saving anything or hiding anything. But as you said, people made up stories about you, and I'm just curious, did you ever figure out, not that you spent a lot of time doing it, but why in the world they would do it? Was it their, like, manufacturing 15 minutes of fame or something?
It was fun. That's why they were doing it.
It was fun. Well, I guess that's the way it is. Also with the story, with the commands, the not so subliminal in the short story and the somewhat subliminal in They Live. And the fact that, especially in They Live, but even in the short story, it was something of a display or a spectacle.
Mm-hmm.
One, I've seen that come up more and more in the United States, especially during, I think, Reagan's administration, where oversized flags were everywhere during his 8-year reign. But this also reminded me a little bit, too, about what Eric Blair, Orwell, was talking about in 1984, where there's this kind of, this...
Big Brother.
Yeah, but the attraction by the spectacle, the size.
Oh, yeah. Well, we have our celebrities. People are totally mesmerized. Prince Harry just fell off his horse.
Yep.
I think yesterday. And this is news.
I know.
I can't see how he wasn't even hurt. He got up, he brushed himself off. He climbed back on his horse, and the entire world gets this spectacle of this celebrity falling off his horse and climbing back on. If I fell off a horse, my grocer wouldn't care.
Actually, it wasn't really a good spill either. So, but with regard to 1984 and Orwell, do you have any kind of insight or take? I mean, I look at that book and I look at Orwell as trying to warn us. He wasn't saying this is a great thing. He's saying, folks, this is what's going to happen. And he may have had good information to that fact because of what he did during World War II. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, maybe you know that the original title of 1984 was 1948.
That's right. Mm-hmm.
And he intended it to be a satire on conditions which he thought already existed.
So, I mean, I consider him I wouldn't say a hero, but I was saying, I look at that book not as some kind of dark satire or that some people believe Orwell wanted this. I think he was saying, look, folks, this is what's going to happen. And you said it was happening at the time. But here again, also, he was involved with propaganda during World War II, and I wonder if sometimes this wasn't his way of expiating himself for that sin.
Well, I don't know if he called it sin. I don't think he thought of himself as somebody who was guilty. I actually knew him, and
okay.
He was rather a carefree fellow. and in some ways kind of an obnoxiously cocksure person. I never saw any indication that he felt any guilt whatsoever about his war activities or anything else that he ever did.
Mm-hmm. Was there any, I would have even thought that perhaps there was a measure of it. I really don't understand why he kind of exiled himself to Jura, which is probably one of the worst places he could have continued in the end of his life. What about that?
You say exile to Europe?
To Jura. Didn't he go up to the island off Scotland's coast? That was rather foul weather.
Yeah, but the idea that going somewhere to an unusual location, being in exile, sort of implies that there are some places that are realer than others.
I would just say more salubrious for one's health.
Well, okay, we can look at it that way. But if I had my druthers, I'd probably be sitting in a sidewalk cafe in gay Paris at this very moment.
Absolutely.
But actually, California is also on the planet.
In the story, we know that Nada has a controller. Now, that struck me very interesting. Can you talk about that?
Well, the idea of somebody having a specific controller came from my impressions of secret agents. There would be somebody who was spying and passing on information, and then there would be a controller who would collect the information and pass it on. And this sort of was part of the standard routine for the spy versus spy universe that existed at the time I wrote the story.
The controller, though, is the one who, could you say, implants the suggestion that he will die at 8 o'clock in the morning? Is that part?
Yes.
Now, at first, it seems that Nada's like, yeah, right, it ain't going to happen. But then his conduct afterwards seems like somebody who knows his time is running out, and the fact that he would go back and tell Robinson, this is what I did, would seem to indicate that he knew, in fact, that he was going to be terminated at 8 o'clock the next morning.
Well, that's what I intended you to. That's the impression I intended.
Okay. So it is true that as much as he kind of went, yeah, sure, he kind of knew the fix was in for him.
Well, the exact thing that influenced me to put that in was my experience with people who were addicted to cigarettes. People who knew that the cigarettes were giving them cancer, and yet they still smoked and insisted on smoking. And this was particularly brought home to me by a guy I knew in France. He was a philosopher named Jean-Paul Sartre. Mm-hmm. And his position philosophically was that we're totally responsible for our behavior. And yet he couldn't quit smoking. He smoked until the day he died, even though by the time that I knew him, which was the late 50s, he already had emphysema. And the smoking was making his emphysema worse. But it was more painful to him that he had a philosophy that said that he was totally responsible for smoking, and yet he still couldn't quit. That was a chemical humiliation to him. And I was thinking about that. I thought that a person who was hypnotized for one thing might still be completely free in fields in which he had not received any hypnotic commands.
So in a way, could you say that Nada was in denial, even if it were enough, if that was what he needed to do what he was going to do before, obviously, he was going to shirk his mortal coil?
I think he was in denial. Sort of implies an amount of control that I wasn't ready to ascribe to the character.
Okay.
There is an idea in Irish folk lore that you can cast a spell on somebody, and that spell will, say, compel them to do some certain deeds, and also can decide the exact moment when they're going to die. They're completely free in every other way, except that their fate is sealed.
In the story, you talk about the aliens being of reptilian form. Now, that's a pretty popular, I guess, symbol or usage of both in science fiction, but it also, there's many that are promoting it as something that really does exist somewhere below the surface of the Earth, perhaps. What was the reason for the choice of taking these aliens as in their true form being reptilian?
Well, a science fiction writer named Robert Heinlein said that the aliens that we fear, alien monsters that we fear, fall into two classifications, the snakes and the spiders. And he wrote some stories based on the idea that we encounter some kind of snakes and some kind of spiders as we explore outer space. And so I said, well, I'll toss a coin here. What will it be, spiders or snakes? And it landed snakes.
Okay. Moving on to one other thing. And this has to do with the idea of making people come awake. Wake up. Now in the short story, he has more of a one-on-one to try to get people to wake up. In the movie, eventually he has to attack the TV station because that is the mode of propaganda. But he gets into the character in the movie, and it's Piper obviously playing the character, gets into an extremely long fight sequence. At first, my thoughts were this is gratuitous because Piper's a wrestler and they're kind of wanting to show his stuff. But then
did you ever guess right there?
Really? Okay. Well,
I have a copy of the shooting script, and that wrestling scene is blank pages. I agitated. I used all the persuasion that I knew how to use to try and get that wrestling scene out.
Okay.
But Roddy Piper, the wrestler, said, he was a lot smarter than I was told he was, and he said, well, if Ray Nelson walks off the set now, we can finish the movie, but if I walk off the set, you can't. And that proved to be a very persuasive argument. Okay.
Now, I was going to hit you with the fact that some of my colleagues took the high road and said, no, this is symbolic for how difficult it is to make people come awake. And I deferred to them, when in essence the former is true.
The former is true. And you'll notice that if you're watching close, you'll see that right after that there comes a scene where these two guys take a hotel room. And they are all covered with scars and bleeding sores and bruises. Do you remember that?
Oh, yeah. Uh-huh.
Okay, immediately thereafter, there comes another scene, no scars.
Extraordinary healing capabilities.
Yep, but I don't think anybody notices that. They don't see that there's something incongruous about it.
What?
But I practically hid under my seat the first time I saw it.
But don't people just consider it the Hollywood effect, okay?
I guess that must be it.
But, that's what made it so cool in a sense. If you think back to one of the first stars who said, I'll go through the movie injured, was Nicholson when he gets his nose slit in Chinatown. And I think, and Newman also in Slapshot, he took stitches across his eye and said, no, leave it. So, that I thought was very real, but we're so used to seeing all this Hollywood miracle stuff, and I think people just go ahead and chalk it up to that.
Well, in this case, the wrestling scene was the very last thing that was shot. And the other movie had been shot in various, it wasn't shot in chronological order. And the reasoning was that if these guys hurt each other, they wouldn't be put out of commission for the rest of the film. But if that sequence was shot at the end of the film,
right,
then they would still be able to make the film. And so those wounds and bruises and things that you see in the hotel room, those are real. They really messed each other up in that alley. And it was an improvised, basically, scene with two cameramen and those guys bashing each other's brains out. It's not in the script at all.
Well, you know, even when you see regular fights on TV, you know, if you've ever been in a good scrape, you realize you can only take about one of those punches, and that's it. You know.
Well, these guys were both in the wrestling game, and especially Roddy was kind of a champion, a famous wrestler. And he was used to getting slightly damaged, but not totally disabled. It was part of the game. He was trying to get out of wrestling. He wanted to be an actor instead, because he thought he would have a longer career if he was an actor than if he was just a wrestler. But it didn't work out that way, unfortunately. But he is a lot smarter than the character that he portrayed there, who's pretty smart. If I had known, you know, he did another film before he did the film that we did, which was really awful. I can't even remember the title, but I saw it. And there was nothing about that film that indicated that he had any talent or brains at all. So I wrote him stupider than he really was. I would have made him smarter if I'd known that he was a smart person. That really blindsided me as a scriptwriter.
Two questions, if I could, about the movie version. One is, there was this capability of the bad guys, because you did have, this is where I'm making the difference, you have the aliens, and then you have those who went over to the alien side.
Yeah, those were not hypnotized. They were just quislings, as they say.
Right. But now they had this capability to disappear. Anything symbolic or inherent in that?
No, that's just a standard science fiction gimmick.
Okay.
It's off the shelf, so to speak.
I also want to ask you about this, the last question about the movie, because this dialogue, I mean, hits me right between the eyes, given the fact that this is probably additional, it looks to me to be additional dialogue outside of what you wrote in 8 o'clock in the morning, but also that this is what was written in 1988 before I realized what was going on, and that is when the Quisling says, I thought you understood. It's business. That's all it is. You still don't get it. There ain't no countries anymore. They're running the whole planet. They own the whole planet, the whole show, rather. They can do whatever they want. We can have it good for a change, blah, blah, blah. But the thing about it's business, that's all it is. You still don't get it. There ain't no countries anymore. That's exactly what's happened.
Right.
Well, whose idea was that, may I ask, to have that in there?
Mine.
So you understood all along that there is this desire by whatever you want to call them, the elite or they, that they want global rule. They will portray it as being very benign and harmonious, but it's a trap. It's the old story. You know, you wouldn't eat a poison apple if it didn't look good on the outside, but take a bite and you've been had.
Have you seen the commercials that British Petroleum is putting out? If you need any more proof, you can just watch those beautiful commercials of the guy flying in a helicopter over the scene where all this oil is spewing out and describing what a beautiful place it is.
Well, what about the fact that in recent months, we've had Congress, which to me is useless as tits on a bowl, and they sit there and they do this grilling of like the four Goldman Sachs guys who are looking across the table with this like veiled malevolence because they both know that this is nothing else but a Punch and Judy show. And they are just about complying because they know they're going to get away without a scratch. The same thing with BP. They bring them out in front of the Senate subcommittee. They go through the yada yada, and you can look in their eyes, the corporatists, and realize it's like they're saying under their breath, "If I could get my hands on you, you son of a bitch, but we'll do this just for the people."
Well, I think you've summed it up very well.
All right. One other thing, if I could, it seems to me that the beginning of the takeover of the United States occurred when the robber baron families gained their untold fortunes and then went about trying to change, or successfully changing, incrementally the landscape of the United States. You went to the University of Chicago.
Right.
And Rockefeller is heavily associated with that, and that seems to be a think tank that produced a number of characters who did definitely manipulate or change certain sectors of American life. John Dewey, for one, with education. Right. What did you see when you were there? Did you pick up what that was all about, or is that just something that kind of happens behind?
No, I fought with my instructions.
Aha.
I challenged them, and I made such a pest of myself that they sent me to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist made a report on me that was so
damaging,
you might say, that it got me out of the Army.
Well,
when I went in for my, I was drafted. I went in for my examination to see if I was fit to be a soldier, and there was this psychiatrist's report. And I was wearing a propeller beanie at the time.
That might have helped, yeah.
And the psychiatrist said, "Take off that hat." And I said, "No." And he said, "Take off that hat. That's an order." And I said, "I don't have to take orders from you. I'm not a soldier." And he stood up, and his face turned bright red, and he said, "By God, you never will be a soldier if I have anything to say about it."
Oh, the heartache. Oh, that's great. I also...
He didn't like my hat. I don't know. It was a nice propeller beanie.
I mean, you could have kissed him. That would have been worse. Had the same effect, but...
I didn't have to.
No, you didn't. I do want to ask you also, if I could, because I was an aficionado of the Beats. I'm sure you've heard people like myself who've probably read everything that Kerouac wrote, but you spent some time with the members of the Beats over in...
Oh, yeah. I spent one afternoon with Kerouac.
Was that enough?
Well, it was enough for him. What happened was I was working at an English language bookstore, and Kerouac came in. He was going to be in a group reading with the other beatniks. But in the meantime, he wanted to meet some French intellectuals. And I knew some French intellectuals. So the boss of the bookstore, George Whitman, he said, "Take him over and introduce him to your French friends." But on the way over to meet the French friends, Kerouac stopped off at this bar and that bar, and by the time he arrived at the place where the friends were, he could hardly stand up. And he started lecturing these guys on how poetry had to be made up as you go along as a free improvisation. And he got into an argument with one of the French writers. Boris Vian is his name. And Boris Vian makes his living as a translator of English into French. And they got into an argument, and Kerouac called him a bastard. And Vian slipped into his BBC British accent and said, "No, no, no. You mean Boston. Boston." And Kerouac got so pissed off that he took the first plane back to the States without appearing at the poetry reading, which he had signed up to appear at.
How did you find Burroughs? Was he a compelling personality?
Burroughs was sort of a gray businessman. Mm-hmm. He spoke very little. He was much older than the other Beats, and they sort of looked up to him. But he had in the center of his mind was the idea that literature is 100% bullshit. And so it didn't matter whether the page 1 came in front of page 2 or page 2 came in front of page 1. So he would shuffle a manuscript like a deck of cards and then read it in whatever order it happened to come out. And the other guys, they didn't do that. They were pretty serious, and so was I. And I still think that at that point, which was the late 50s, Burroughs was kind of nuts. When he wrote Junkie,
okay,
he was still part of the science fiction fraternity, so to speak. And Junkie's a pretty good job. Junkie's a nice story. It was published as an ace double by Donald Wollheim, who was the editor there, as a science fiction guy, published it. And I think people are going to be reading that particular story for maybe a couple of 100 years from now. But everything else Burroughs wrote is poisoned by Burroughs' idea that literature is bullshit 100%. All literature.
I've been thinking about them more lately because of, I guess Ginsberg has a photo exhibit going on in D.C. And one of the things, of course, that's pretty glaring are the before and after photos, if you will, of Kerouac and the dissipation that had set in. But I guess Ginsberg obviously got more serious about photography later part of his life. But there's been some
Ginsberg looked like a rabbi by the time he finally died.
Yeah, yep.
He was a clean living dude amongst these people, and a hard-working writer.
Mm-hmm.
He wrote a vast amount, some of which is very good indeed. And some of these guys, they wrote one thing, and then they had something to show girls that they were a real writer, and then they stopped writing.
They're living in Jersey. I grew up not far from where he was in Patterson. And,
yeah.
And to this day, they have a literary contest in his name out of, I believe it's Passaic Community College. So, if I could ask you one last question, a lot of people wanted to know about this, and I hope I can do them right. Philip K. Dick, would you say you had, amongst other writers, a closer relationship with Dick than you did others?
The closest relationship I had was with Boris Vian, but Phil Dick would come in second.
He seemed to be, I don't know, to me he's, I guess from the writers of that time in that genre, I guess he has to be my favorite. He seemed exceptional. Any take on that?
Well, I think he certainly was exceptional, and because he concentrated on psychological themes rather than gadgets, his gadgets were just taken off the science fiction shelf in the local science fiction store, so to speak. But he had a lot of ambition to be a serious writer, and he wrote a whole series of realistic novels, which didn't get published until he died. And that's what he liked. But he wanted also to actually eat, so he wrote science fiction in quantity, but slipped in the psychological and philosophical ideas that he wanted to get across.
You had a working relationship with Asimov as well, to some extent?
No. I never met Asimov.
Okay. All right. So
Asimov was an East Coast guy.
Mm-hmm.
Asimov didn't like to get out of the shadow of the Empire State Building. He became extremely uncomfortable if he was beyond the shadow of the Empire State Building. So in his whole life, he never learned to drive a car, and he didn't leave the neighborhood in which he'd grown up unless somebody paid him a large sum of money to do it, which some people did.
Well, as you wrote in 8 o'clock in the morning about the way you saw the future and the way it was starting to unravel at that time, I think of the one short story that I would consider in that same plot line, and that's a short story he did about the winnowing. Are you familiar?
I'm not familiar with that one.
No, it was just that the terminology is a little bit outdated, but that doesn't mean anything. What he was saying was, and you can think about genetically modified crops, and he was talking about the handlers, if you will, the they, talking about how they could affect a depopulation with it looking like it might be a plague where some people would be resistant, some a little resistant, and some not resistant at all, and it would be in basically the grain. And here we are.
Well, I don't know. if we've actually had the plague.
Well, maybe not. I hope not. But I feel extremely uncomfortable with the progression that's being made. Like it's a good thing with this genetically modified seeds and food. We really don't know what we're getting. That's why when those people ate some tacos and they had some other kind of weird genes in them, they died. So.
Well, Asimov had one idea, which was very close to an idea of mine. He had telepathic robots controlling people by hypnosis. That was how he tied his Foundation series together with his robot series. He'd been working the vein of these two universes for a long time, and then he decided that he would hook them together. And the way he hooked them together was to postulate super intelligent robots that were subtly guiding human beings and keeping them from getting into too much trouble. And the great difference between Asimov and me was that his robots were the good guys, and my aliens were the bad guys.
I probably would lean more to your assessment. So. Are you writing anything now, or are you playing anything?
Well, I'm not writing anything for professional publication. I write stuff for very small circulation magazines that deal with the popular arts of the 20th century. Sort of a scholarly thingy. But I'm not doing any fiction or film work now. Theoretically, I'm retired. I'm in my late 70s, So I have an excuse.
Okay. What about the artwork either?
Well, I have a few clients left over from when I was a art editor at a trade journal for window cleaners. And occasionally I do some work for them. But other than that, I'm not doing any artwork for publication.
All right. Ray Nelson, I want to thank you for spending some time with us, quite a bit. And again, thank you for being so generous.
Well, it was a great ball for me, to tell you the truth. I enjoyed every minute.
Well, I was hoping you would, and I was hoping that I could relate to you on that level, because I was very interested in talking to you, more so than most guests, and that's the truth. I had to find out who you were to a certain extent, and I'm glad that you acceded to the interview. It's raynelson.com. You can check out that website for purchasing his materials. And also, I had to admit, you had some sage words for writers.
Yes.
Under Fiction Faults, I believe that is.
That's it.
That's words to live by. Ray, would you just stay with us for a second? And folks, you've been listening to Think or Be Eaten, and we'll see you next time.